The one thing that is absolutely certain is that the skids are under the British government, as it still struts around the international stage, issuing threats and démarches and ultimata. Inside their own parliament, they are literally fighting each other and insulting Jacob Rees-Mogg, lèse-majesté. But we have the prince of political commentators with us now. He is the one and only Peter Oborne, a man of, I think he'll forgive me if I describe him as of conservative bearing, but a man very much at odds with the recent Conservative government. He joins me now after an absence of some months. Peter Oborne, thank you for being with us on what has turned out to be a rather auspicious evening. Give me your summary of where stands now the British Conservative government.
Well, you followed just as much as I have, George, the events of the last few hours. And what we've seen is really the collapse of an already collapsing administration. We've seen let's go through it. So we've had the resignation of the Home Secretary, which seems a minor matter. We've had, in comparison to something, shoving and pushing and alleged intimidation in the voting lobbies involving the Conservative Party. We've apparently had, although reports contradict this, the resignation of the chief whip. We've and we have a prime minister who can't cope. I mean, it is worth asking. The Conservative Party has been, the party which has governed Britain more than any other, the most successful party in many ways in the Western world for the last 200 years. The party of Winston Churchill, of Margaret Thatcher, Benjamin Disraeli before then, and I'm wondering whether this is it.
Yes, I wonder about that, because it's really two parties in one. I mean, both the major parties have historically been two parties, at least two, inside one big tent. That is a product of our first past the post electoral system. But perhaps there is a last straw which breaks the camel's back. And looking at right-wing Twitter and knowing people to the right of you in the Conservative ranks as I do, I'm wondering if this is a breaking point, Peter.
Well, if there was an election tomorrow morning, and I don't think we can rule out the possibility now there'll be a general election, because the Conservative Party is consumed by such bitter hatred. The Conservatives might win one seat in a parliament of 650, perhaps not even one seat. So that's the situation as we stand, according to the polls before the debacle today, is that the Conservative Party won't win. It would not get returned at all. Maybe Rishi Sunak, who has, I think, the safest seat in the country, maybe he would, Richmond. But I don't think that even he would get back.
At least that would make him the leader.
That would solve a lot of problems, because, of course, I assume what is happening now, George, you know better than me, experienced parliamentarian that you are, but they must have decided and be telling Liz Truss now that you must go. But the difficulty is, the reason she's staying there is what replaces her. What do they do? What if she says, no, I'm not going to go? And how do they dismantle her, force her out? And then how do they arrange a bloodless coup, a succession where they don't fight over who gets the next job?
Well, of course, there are many barriers to forcing her out on paper. But as the famous Liverpool manager, Bill Shankly, said, on paper we should beat them, but football's not played on paper, it's played on grass. and politics is played on the grass of the turf of the House of Commons. So even if the rules say that Liz Truss cannot be no confidence for 12 months, water always finds a way to flow downhill, and will do if the political weather really has profoundly changed, as you and I both think it has. So it wouldn't be difficult to force her out. The men in grey suits, women in grey suits, show up and say, you literally have no support left, Liz. Go now, before we have to organise empty benches behind you in Parliament, before we have to table a no confidence motion in the House itself against you. There are many ways that they could force her out. But the bloodless coronation, well, that is the problem, isn't it? I dare say the MPs could do it, because the MPs never wanted Liz Truss in the first place. They wanted Rishi Sunak. The problem is the members in the country do not want Rishi Sunak. The members in the country think we should be ruling India, not that an Indian should be ruling us. The members in the country want Boris Johnson, not Rishi Sunak. That's why I say we may be close to a breaking point, Peter.
That's right. I think that, and by the way, remember the MPs themselves, they're not all the kind of Rishi Sunak supporters. You looked at the way that Suella Braverman, who is used her brief time as Home Secretary to wage war on liberty and freedom and pursue an authoritarian, in my view, bigoted agenda. She's not going to want to roll in behind Rishi Sunak or Jeremy Hunt, whoever it may be. And there's plenty like her. I think what happened is that the far right captured quite a lot of the Conservative Party. And so it's now likely to split between the kind of the libertarian financialized wing of the party, which generated that budget, which gave enfranchised the super rich, and then the more conservative, traditionally conservative wing of the party. It may be splitting as we speak, or maybe they're going to try and come together to save their skins. It's my view. I don't know if you agree with me, is that we do need a general election. They don't have any credibility. These people have done the most terrible damage to our country, and they aren't fit. I mean, really, they couldn't run. I mean, as I know, because I love pubs, I go to the pub. Pubs, you require a lot of skill and attention and a human empathy to run a decent pub. These people couldn't run our local pub, let alone this country.
Well, that's true, of course, on both sides of the House, and herein lies the trouble with a general election. Of course, I support a general election. I think this government has lost its mandate. It has thrown it away, as a matter of fact. I mean, Boris Johnson, I know you don't like him. Boris Johnson returned a landslide victory for the Conservatives not that long ago, but it's all been thrown away. It's all been wasted. And it now has effectively no authority to govern. As you say, it can't even govern its own affairs inside its own party. Definitely couldn't run a convivial public house and cannot run an effective government. My problem is that I don't believe that Keir Starmer and his Labour front bench is any better, and that Britain faces a Tweedledee, Tweedledum choice. And so I think we're in a bleak place, Peter. Not since 1940, 41, when we were existentially challenged, have we been in a worse place than this. But then we had men of the calibre of Mr. Churchill and Mr. Attlee and Mr. Bevin, and so on. We simply don't have such people on the political front line now.
I understand what you're saying, and I share many of your reservations about Mr. Starmer. You will have seen the Labour Files documentary, which I appeared in, which made me feel that I would be uncomfortable with Mr. Starmer, the way he's treated honourable Labour activists, and I've said my say on that. But we are doing, and we do face it is not a war in 1940, but I do believe we're facing the greatest social, economic, political, constitutional crisis of your lifetime and mine. And really to ask Liz Truss or whoever might succeed her to do that job is wrong. And although Mr. Starmer, I have my reservations, which I've just outlined, I do think that him and the Labour front bench are not responsible for the complete and terrible shambles which we're now going through. And the problem fundamentally is economic at the moment. And I would trust that I wouldn't trust Miss Truss or Kwasi Kwarteng or whoever with the mortgage. They're going to drive it up. If you're a business person, you feel that they're likely to send you bankrupt, and therefore I would prefer, speaking as a Conservative, to have Labour and Sir Keir Starmer in charge of things at the moment. Very much so.
You mentioned earlier the hatreds. I'd like to drill down, if I can, with you, what these hatreds are about. Is this all about Brexit? Is it unreconciled differences over the European Union?
I think if you look at what happened at Brexit, and I think both you and I voted for Brexit, George, and both of us have got to ask a deep question about ourselves, whether we put this country in a disastrous direction, perfectly honourably, because we believe what we were doing, but fatally for Britain. Now, there have been three iterations, really, of Brexit. First of all, we had Theresa May, who wanted to strike a deal with Europe, have a pragmatic Brexit, and that was destroyed by Johnson, who you have a higher opinion of than me. Johnson tried to actually have the nearest thing which you might have liked. I can see that, a Brexit for the kind of workers of Northern England, a levelling up Brexit. And although he never really showed how he could do it, he was brought down by the fact that he was a pathological liar, and the way he conducted himself as Prime Minister was wholly improper and unacceptable. So he went because he lied. And then we got the third iteration of Brexit, which has been libertarian Brexit, the Brexit of the hedge fund managers, the Brexit of Mayfair, the Brexit, and of course that went calamitously wrong straight away. And we've had three attempts at Brexit. And I have to say to you, and I respect your position, I can see it was an honourable one, and mine, but were we very naive, and do we now have to think? I suggest to you that Brexit decision has led to the national humiliation. Let's be honest about it. Today's national humiliation. The Britain is now tonight the laughingstock of the world. Every vestige of dignity or of ability to say this is how you should do things is gone. And do we have to, you and I, to say to each other, we got it wrong?
Well, I think you're half right, but the half that you're wrong is that the European Union is in an even worse state than we are. Its politicians, Borrell, addressing the European Parliament this week, described Europe as a garden and the rest of the world as a jungle, the heart of darkness. They are embroiled in hyper war, economic war against Russia, which has beggared their own people. The European Union is a malfunctioning catastrophe. So to say we should have stayed in it in order to avoid our national humiliation seems to me to make no sense, Peter.
As always, one of the reasons I regard you so highly, George, is that you refer to things which the national press, the mainstream press, don't mention. So this outrageous series of statements by the most senior diplomat in the European Union, which is basically racist and colonialist, which has been ignored. Have you seen in the mainstream British press? And it's deeply troubling. I accept that about the European Union. I don't accept. If you're talking about Ukraine, you have to understand. You would have to accept that Britain is one with the rest of Europe over Ukraine. That is not a Brexit issue, therefore.
No, it isn't. But the European Union is now electing the likes of the new Italian Premier. The countries of Hungary and Poland and Croatia and Slovakia are crying out against Brussels and its enforcement actions against them on issues like immigration or other social policy issues, woke issues, greenery issues, and so on. The fissures inside the remaining members of the European Union are very profound, and their political leaders are no better than ours. They're just as bad as ours, I should say.
I wonder about that. If you look at as I say, the fundamental crisis at the moment is an economic crisis. You are not seeing that level of economic mismanagement, nothing like it in Europe, as you are in this country, which has simply under the governance of Liz Truss and the Conservatives taken leave of its senses. And what tells you that is bond yields and the strength of the currency, that something has gone nightmarishly wrong in this country. Now, you are right. There are very serious problems in Europe. You could have added, of course, the naked Islamophobia of Macron in France, which has been very troubling and dishonored the French nation. But I still would say to you that you've got to trace this national calamity, which the scenes of total shame and chaos in the House of Commons today, and what's preceded it, and what is going to come, because we're going through something. It's not over yet. It's going to get worse. Should you not trace it to that fateful decision in June 2016?
I absolutely don't. I don't resile from my stand on Brexit and for self-government, which is my principal reason for having supported Brexit. I'm a Bennite. I was a Bennite before, and I'm a Bennite now. I believe that if you cannot remove the people that govern you, then you are not living in a democracy. We can now remove this government that governs us. We could not remove Mr. Borrell. If we'd remained in the European Union, Mr. Borrell would have been speaking for us in the colonial, Kipling-esque, a bit farcical, Peter, because the real colonialists in the later period of colonialism didn't really regard Spaniards as quite like us, a bit dusky, a bit jungly themselves. It is one of the great ironies that a Spanish socialist could be speaking in the words and the terms that would have made Kipling blush. It was rank, heart of darkness, Joseph Conrad, Orientalism, colonialism, racism, and he would have been speaking for us if we had still been in the European Union.
Well, unfortunately, you will agree that if you look at members of the Liz Truss's front bench, we have our own politicians saying exactly the same thing. And it does make you reflect that maybe the reason why it hasn't become a story, apart from your conversation with mine now, it hasn't become at all a story in the mainstream British press, is because they agree with this racist diplomat who Europe, the most senior diplomat in Europe. They're not offended by the terrible things he said. And of course, you're right. You talk about the irony of France, but let's remember that there was you talk about the irony of Spain, but let's reflect that there was, a Spanish empire, and that where did Franco turn up from in 1936? He hops over the Mediterranean from Morocco, from the Spanish Empire in Morocco. So, and if you go back deeper to then, you can think of the terrible things which the Spaniards did to the people of South America. And so there is a appalling legacy of imperialism and colonialism. And I think probably it'd be safe to call it genocide when you go back into the Spanish past.
Absolutely, absolutely. 100 million people were wiped out in the Americas after Columbus discovered it. 100 million from Chile to Canada lost their lives. A cultural genocide and an actual genocide carried out by Spanish, French, and of course British settler colonialism. Without a doubt, Peter, I could talk to you all night, but we better let someone else have a chance. Thanks very much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. God bless you.